really stay focused on our own spiritual development in a world which is absolutely adrift with opinions, ridiculous opinions oftentimes, and probably most importantly, distracting opinions that draw our focus away from our own spiritual life. And so if you could just give him your full attention during this time. And Steve, come on up. Yeah, silence your cell phones, please.
Let's see here. That's it?
Yep,
Okay.
that's it.
Okay, the title of my talk is The Prayer of St Ephraim in the Digital Age. And it's not, the irony of this being on the internet, and I'm going to talk about the internet, is not lost on me. So, but it's part of our life now, it's part of who we are, it's part of what we are, it's inescapable. Just about everything we do and everything we see is basically driven by the internet, and so it's an important part of our life and therefore part of our spiritual lives. So, thanks for sitting up front. So one of the things that I've noticed is Orthodox people are not afraid of death, but they're afraid of the front of the building. So, we're afraid of fronts.
Yes.
So anyway, so before I actually, excuse me, I knew that was going to happen.
I'll get you some water.
Thank you. So I've been on the internet now for about, what's 1995 from 2025?
30 years.
30 years. Yeah, 30 years. I'm like the Rain Man, but I'm not good at math. So, so 30 years. I started off in with AOL and Netscape, all that kind of stuff. Dial up with the screechy sound, and back then we had Yahoo groups, and Yahoo groups were basically like text-based groups where you log in and you can like type to each other. Oops. There we go. And so I was on those for several years, and then got into when other social media came out. I kind of got involved in some of that. I had the probably first I think the first Orthodox podcast on earth before there were podcasts back in 2002, I think it was, when we were doing the radio show here in Phoenix. We were recording that and putting it up on a website that Bill Gould, my co-partner on it, had built. He was into that. His job was that kind of stuff for a company. So anyway, I've been on the internet a lot. My wife will testify to that. And so I've seen and done just about everything sinful and things I'm going to talk about, and hopefully some good things. And so before we start talking about us and the internet, first a few words about technology. So technology is not evil in itself. Our theology teaches that evil actually has no independent existence. Evil is not something that exists on its own by itself as a thing. There is no dark side. There is no evil stuff. The only thing evil is the absence or the perversion of the virtues. And so the angels were created good. There were no evil angels created. And so when they fell, they are a perversion of the good that God created them to be. And so everything that happens within us that is evil and everything that we create has the potential for being good. And so I remember, probably 50 years ago, we had a missionary in my old Protestant church who was traveling around and fundraising for his mission work in Papua New Guinea. And part of his presentation was he had some primitive bows and arrows, made out of tree branches, and some spears with stone heads on them. And he was talking about how barbaric and primitive these people were, and that we needed to bring the gospel to them and get them out of this barbaric existence. And so I thought about it and said, well, these people had bows and arrows and a spear, and if they want to kill somebody, they have to actually see that person's face. They have to be close enough to them to be able to hit them with that stuff, and it had to be a one-on-one thing. It was a personal thing. And so you could kill one person at a time with their technology. Well, with our technology, we can fly over them at 10,000 and 20,000 feet. We can drop a bomb, never see a face, and wipe out 2 million people. So who's really barbaric? Well, technology has given us the opportunity and the ability to use that same power and that same force to do some really good stuff or some really evil stuff. So technology in and of itself is not, an evil thing. There's a lot of good that can happen with it. So the internet doesn't create our passions. The internet is not the thing that makes us evil. The internet is the thing that brings out our passions. The internet is the thing that fishes into my heart, fishes into my psyche, fishes into my past, fishes into my issues, fishes into my, my upbringing, my concept of the world. And it goes in there and it grabs something and it yanks it out and puts it on display for the entire world to see. And so we have a much greater opportunity and a huge audience for our stuff. And of course, all of our stuff we think, is really good and really worth everybody seeing and knowing about. And so we stick it out there, and anybody with a phone or a camera, or you don't even have to really have internet. You can sit in Starbucks and not even have an internet account and become a worldwide famous teacher, guru, jerk, whatever. You can be anything on the internet with a very minimum amount of access and money and even relationships. And so part of the problem with that is that the internet is faceless. We are essentially anonymous entities on the web. Nobody really knows who we are. There's a cartoon that I saw years and years and years ago, and there's a dog sitting in front of a computer, and he's talking to another dog sitting on the floor next to him, and he's smiling. He says, "Nobody's a dog on the internet." And that's basically true. None of us on the internet are really who we are sitting right here, looking at one another across a table with a plate of chips and salsa. So that's an entirely different entity from what we put out there to the world to see. And so there's a degree of anonymity. We have this like a false self that gets reinforced, that gets likes and thumbs up and all of that on the internet that we probably would not get if we were sitting with our mother at supper. So that in itself is an issue, but The other thing that happens on the internet, and so I've been a teacher way back in the Protestant church for years, and then I became eventually a teacher in the Orthodox Church. But one of the issues that I had in converting to the Orthodox Church was that if I knew that if I converted and I didn't have one of these, nobody cares what I say. Nobody has any interest in what I'm talking about if I don't have a black robe. And I knew that. And so that was a huge speed bump for me coming into the church, because I valued and cherished my role as a teacher. And I took it seriously. I read James, let not many of us be teachers because we incur a greater judgment. It was a serious, serious thing to me. And so not being able to continue that ministry in the Orthodox Church was an issue for me. But then the internet comes along. And now I don't have to have qualifications. I don't have to have a board of elders that's going to sit down with me as a teacher in my church and say, you're not going to teach in our congregation. You're not going to occupy a classroom and stand up in front of a group of people because you're not qualified. You're teaching false doctrine. You are disruptive. You are factious, whatever. You are not allowed to teach. And so if I wanted to teach in a congregation, I had to have a good relationship. I had to have qualifications. I had to be teaching truth according to whatever the truth was there. And I was vetted. And I was supervised. Believe me, I was supervised in my Protestant church. But I had to get permission. And if I wasn't a good teacher, and if I was teaching, false things, and if I was rabble-rousing, there were consequences. On the internet, there is none of that. None. You can teach 50 million people on the internet and not have one hierarch, one priest, one bishop, anybody that's going to stop you. As an aside on that, if I ran the universe and if I ran the church, every bishop would have a department of internet stuff, and they would have some guy, whoever, with about 50 sock puppet accounts, and they would befriend every seminarian and every person who walks through that door and says, "I'm here to be a priest," which just about every young man is one of those people. I was one. And that bishop's office would basically befriend these people on the internet, watch them, see who they are, see what they're putting out there, see how they react in comment boxes, and, because that's who they really are. That's who they're going to be in running a parish. And believe me, I've seen it. So, one of the qualifications of being a presbyter, one of the qualifications of becoming a priest in the pastoral epistles. Thank you. One of the qualifications of becoming a priest in the pastoral epistles to Timothy is that you have to have a good reputation in the world. That is rarely followed through with by our hierarchs. My son is a priest, and nobody from the church contacted his family, me, his mother, his brothers and sisters, his former employers, his bandmates, his high school teachers. They had no idea who he was in real life. He had the recommendation of his priest, who saw him for 3 hours on a weekend. And how many of us here cannot fake being pious for 3 hours on a weekend?
I do.
So, that, and then beyond that, who are you on the internet? And so we have to have the internet gives us the opportunity to be anything and everything without any discernment, without any supervision, without any vetting, so anyway, it's an issue. It's a real problem. So what I'm going to talk about here today is not just about religion. There's a lot of stuff out there right now on YouTube, Facebook groups and everything that's about orthodoxy, it's about religion. People are casting around, heresy and anathemas and ecumenists and all that stuff like holy water on theophany. It's a mess out there. But this isn't just about religion. It's not just about talking about the faith. It's about everything. I'm part of some drywall groups. I'm a part of some carpentry groups, sewing groups. I've got a lot of interest. And basically, anybody who puts anything up in one of those groups says, here's my work. Please be kind. Why would you have to have please be kind when I put a picture of something that I labored over and most of it's beautiful stuff. But I'll tell you what, no matter how beautiful it is, there's always going to be a comment thread about 30 boxes long about, you should throw that in your alley. I would cut that up for firewood, stuff like that. I mean, so it's not just people about religion. It's just right. People are jerks. And the internet lets them do that. So basically, it gives us an avenue and an opportunity to deal with people in the most uncharitable and aggressive and egotistical way that we can muster up. And, it's not about sharing ideas anymore. It's really about opposing ideas. It's not about saying, hey, can we have a conversation about this? It's more about, these are my ideas. And this is what I think. And, come at me. And so my rule of thumb anymore is if I read something at all that's even mildly controversial, there's always that little thing on Facebook that says, 397 comments. Well, if there's anything more than about 30 comments on anything, I scroll past. Because nothing new, nothing original, nothing that everybody else doesn't already know is going to be said about anything after 30 comments. It's all going to be a rehash and arguments and comebacks and insults and all that about things that have already been said and everybody knows about. So it's not really social media anymore. It's like anti-social media. But again, it's there, and we have to deal with it. So there's I've been reading The Ladder because it's Lent and it's part of our thing at St. Ignatius. And of course, man, we're going to talk more about this later, but the internet is our modern day ladder of divine ascent. It is. We have all these rungs, and I'm going to talk about those in the next session. But we have all these rungs that we need to get to, and every one of them is an opportunity for us to look at ourselves, not look at everybody else, not look at that jerk who posted that stuff or commented about this stuff. It's an opportunity for us to look at ourselves and where we are on that progression toward becoming conformed to the image of Christ. How do we live as the image of Christ in the world, even on the internet? And so one of the things in the ladder, St. John says, is we should not be dismayed if we find that our passions are stronger at the beginning of our monastic life than they were in our life in the world. So he's talking about monks here, but we're talking about it's a universal experience. And so he said we have to remove the causes of that sickness, and then our health comes to us. And so people enter the monastery to recover from the sickness that they experience in the world. Well, they go to the hospital, and guess what? They get sicker, or it seems like they get sicker. But St. John says, no, you're not getting sicker. The beasts were there all the time, only they didn't show themselves. So now you're in a monastery, and your whole focus is about overcoming the beast. Well, guess what? The beasts are all going to come out. And it's the same way when we come to the church. We come to the church to become healed of our infirmities, to be healed of our passions, to be healed of our falling for temptations. And all of our temptations come from here. They're not out there, they're here. And so we ask, why do people become total jerks when they become Orthodox? Well, the internet was the key to their cage. And the internet unlocked that cage, and every demon and beast and passion is now pouring out into the world. Not just your family, not just your kids, not just your wife, not just your pastor, to the whole world to see. And so it shouldn't surprise us that when we come to church to be healed, that we actually seem to get worse for a while. Because now we have we've challenged our demons to a fist fight, because we're here. We're in the arena. We're in the cage now, and nobody's going to get out alive. Either we'll be killed or the demons will be killed. And so it's a warfare, and that's what one of the books is called, The Unseen Warfare. Highly recommended. Lorenzo Scupoli. Look it up, The Unseen Warfare. It's amazing. So he talks a lot about all that stuff that comes, that's inside of us, that comes out when we engage the spiritual life and the demons. So the problem is our passions are not just one thing. There's a lot of them. There's tons of them. And that's what the Prayer of St Ephraim's about, is all these different passions. And they're not just like individual things, they're all interconnected. You heal one of them, or you think you did, and there's all these other ones that are attached to that one. And so, you've got like 3 pit bulls that are all on one leash. Well, you pull the one leash and you think you got that one under control. Well, guess what? You got the other 2 that are just, yanking on that same chain, and they're all connected. So, the passions are like playing whack-a-mole, with your inner life. You got one pop up, you bang that one down, and all of a sudden you got this other one. I finally mastered fasting. Well, guess what? Your vainglory just came up, and that they talk a lot about that kind of stuff. We'll be talking a lot about that too. So St. John Cassian, and this is going to kind of summarize this section here. He says, our seventh struggle is against the demon of pride, and it's difficult to fight against because it has many forms and appears in all of our activities, in our way of speaking. Now, how does that work? You ever met a newly Orthodox person that talks like this? Forgive me, brother. Lord have mercy. May it be blessed. You didn't talk like that when you're a cashier at Walmart. Why are you talking about that like that in the church? Because it's pride. It's an ego thing, or a weak ego thing, actually. But anyway, so how we speak, in what we say, or in our silence, in our spiritual work, in our vigils and fasts, in prayer, in reading, in attending services, in our stillness, in our long-suffering. And when the demons cannot seduce a man with extravagant clothes, it tempts him by means of shabby ones. How does that work? So there's a story in the Desert Fathers where a monk had this really ragged robe he'd worn for years. There were holes in it, and it was dirty and all. And he would have pilgrims who would come and say, Father, I brought you a new robe. Your old one is so worn out. And he would always turn them away. And one day, one of the fathers came down out of his cave and saw that happen. And he went up to the monk and he said, Brother, I can see your pride through the holes in your robe. Our prayer ropes, how we dress in church. All of these things are ways. They're not evil, they're not bad in themselves, but they're ways for us to be tempted to pride and to ego and to a show of faith, a show of piety that doesn't exist in here. It's all like Renaissance Festival orthodoxy. We put it on the weekends for 6 weeks a year, and then we go home. We go home to our real self. So he says, when it can't flatter you with honor, it inflates him for enduring what seems to be dishonor. When it cannot persuade him to feel proud of his display of eloquence, it entices him through silence into thinking that he has achieved inner stillness. If it can't puff him up with showing off his luxurious table, it lures him into fasting really good for the sake of praise. In short, every battle, every task, every activity gives this malicious demon a chance for a battle. And that's what we're up against with the internet. And so basically, again, it's not about what you post, it's not about what you believe, it's not about what you promote, it's about how these things are affecting you and what is in you that you bring out with these things as vehicles. They're the bus. They're not the things in the bus. Your heart and your inner life are the things that are in those buses. And so, again, internet's not evil, politics aren't evil, religion's not evil, carpentry's not evil, but how you interact with those things and what you bring yourself to them is where the evil comes from. So this is hard stuff. This is really hard stuff. And I'm not picking on anyone. I'm not picking on a specific topic, a specific subject. I'm not picking on anyone in particular. I'm picking on everything and everyone, including myself. When I was preparing for this for the last 3 or 4 weeks, it was challenging. There was some hard stuff for me to look at myself. I'd read something in one of the sayings of the fathers, then I have to go back to my comment boxes and go, oh man. So yeah, it's all about I'm there. So Prayer of St. Ephraim. We're going to do this in two parts. We're going to do the take away from me, and then we're going to go rather give me. So first part is take away. And this is what we're going to talk about, asking God to remove from us, O Lord and Master of my life, take from me the spirit of sloth, despair, sometimes translated faint-heartedness, lust of power, and idle talk. So if you ask God to take something away from you, be prepared. Because you just prayed for it, and God answers prayer. And he's going to give you every opportunity to not be slothful, not be faint-hearted, not to lust for power. He's going to offer you. You're going to get offered power, and you're going to, whether you grab it or not, we'll see. And idle talk. That one right there should just like put a spear in your forehead. But we'll get to that in a little bit. So sloth. Take from me the spirit of sloth. What is sloth? Well, sloth, we think of the three-toed sloth, and we the really slow and the lazy person. We think of sloth as just being lazy. And that's kind of true, that sloth is laziness or just doing things in a lackadaisical manner. But it's like the second law of spiritual thermodynamics. Everything kind of winds down. Everything starts off great, and it just kind of trickles off into a whimper. And that happens because we're not attentive. That happens because we're not paying attention to ourselves. We're not recognizing when we're being tempted to wind down, when we're doing this instead of what we know we should be doing. We've given up the battle. We've given up the fight to stay on an equilibrium, to stay strong, to stay in the pocket of our spiritual life. And so when I think it was Hebrews, talks about the boat that just is blown about by every wind. You put up the sail, you come to the church, but there's nobody at the rudder. There's nobody guiding. The winds are everywhere. But unless there's somebody manning the sails, you're just going to go wherever the wind takes you. And so we have to be attentive to that. It takes some skill. It takes some work to manage the sails. And if you don't know how to do that, then we have spiritual fathers to help us with that. And so we either trust our own judgment about how to sail the boat, or we ask for help. So all of those things come together, and the neglect of any one of those things can result in sloth. Mm-hmm. So the spiritual life is not sustained automatically. It just doesn't happen without effort. But a person, and this is where it gets kind of, the demons and the delusion and the pride and all that stuff. A person can be zealous and still slothful. How does that happen? Well, if you are in a state of feeding your ego, what are you going to do? You're not going to do the hard stuff. You're going to do the easy stuff that gets your ego fed. And so your priority is not your spiritual life. Your priority is your spiritual life in front of other people. Mm. And your efforts are not put toward the things that are important for the good of your soul. They're put forward into the things that get you seen, that get you noticed, that get you popular, that get you a thumbs up, get you likes. So your goals are random, and your effort is focused on all the wrong things. And even if you do a hard thing, it's still about you. You can do the hardest thing on earth. You can spend 40 days on bread and water during Lent, and then undo the whole thing because you post on Facebook, I fainted on Holy Thursday because I was only eating bread and water for all of Lent. Boom, virtue signaling. And so that's sloth. That's laziness. Because what energy we have, and all that energy can be focused somewhere else. It's a lot of energy to be egotistical. Trust me, it really is. It's hard to keep up that level of fakeness, everywhere at all times, in all places. The commentary of St. Lorenz on the ego, everywhere, every place, and at all times. That's an inside theological joke. So yes, we can be slothful and zealous at the same time, and we have some quotes later on. But the demons tempt us to do things that are harder than we should be tackling in our spiritual life, because that's a good way to get you to fail. And we'll talk more about that later. So, step 26 of the ladder, St. John says, as a blind man cannot see to walk, so a slothful man can neither see good nor do it. And so, sloth also has to do, with our ability to see the world as it is in the present moment and our relationship to it. And we've all done this, okay? I'm in Lent. I'm at Fry's. I am going down the little cheese and refrigerator aisle. I'm passing up all the cheese on sale. And down at the end of it, there's this little 2-foot section with the tofu and the soy hot dogs and all that stuff. So I am pushing my cart to the tofu. And there's this old lady with her cart right in the middle of the aisle, and she's over there looking at the cheese. And I'm standing there going, out of my way, I'm trying to get to the fasting food. Here we go. Sloth. So, again in step 26, as steel is attracted to the magnet without it even meaning to be, it is drawn by an inexplicable force of nature, so he who has contracted sinful habits is tyrannized by them. How are we tyrannized on the internet by our sinful habits? Doom scrolling. We cannot pass up an evil story, a slander, a acerbic, insulting commentary on somebody, something, whatever it is. Doom scrolling. Trolling. How many times are we reading something and it's like, oh man, watch this. I'm going to suck this guy into, we've seen it. We've all seen it. So we cannot not reply. We see something and we have to respond to it. There's no scrolling past it. There is no way that we're going to let that go. So, we take offense. We can't scroll past anything, and then we're a slave to our passions, and the internet fishes for those in us and drags them out. So I have an orthograph. It's one of those graphs like this. And basically, it says we have slavery to the passions and proportional to the number of comments you leave in an argument on, Facebook, Twitter, or whatever. The more comments you leave, there's your passion level. And if you're not sure if that's truly a passion or whatever, screenshot that and bring it to Father in confession. He'll let you know. He'll tell you whether you're passionate or not. So if we think we're holy, this is why we have spiritual fathers. This is why you have spiritual directors. People who will call us on our stuff, call us on our illusions, and point us in the right direction, focus our energies, focus our efforts on things that we can accomplish, not things that we're just, St. Paul says, boxing wind, which is it's a lot of effort to box wind, and you're worn out, but you haven't accomplished a thing, and you haven't won any battles. So, sloth. Be aware, even if you're out there going full bore, you can be slothful. So take from me the spirit of sloth. Take from me the spirit of despair, faint-heartedness. So despair, mostly, the most obvious thing about despair is the church is going to go to hell in a handbasket without my input, my teaching, my spiritual advice, and my enlightened holy presence on the internet. Somebody has to save the church, and somebody has to defend orthodoxy and defend God. And that somebody is me, because I do it so well. And I have read so many books, and I have chanted services for 25 years, so I know the Meneon, I know the services. I even did St. Stephen's course. So, got all this knowledge, all this wisdom, and I know so many people. So obviously, I'm the person who can run the church. If I ran the church, things would be a lot different. So, but. So I remember long time ago, I was talking to my spiritual father, and I was a brand new convert, and I knew enough to know that I didn't know it all, but I knew most of it. and so I was talking to him about the cradle church and how the cradle people are just so nominal and all that stuff. And I think I literally said, somebody has to save the church. And he just looked at me and he said, no, the church doesn't need saving. The church saves you. Okay. First lesson in humility, not my first lesson in humility, but it was a big one. So God can take care of himself. The church can take care of itself. It has taken care of itself for 2,000 something years, even with all the issues and problems and crappy bishops and heretics and persecutions and all of that. Guess what? It's still here, and we're here because the church got through all of that. I was talking to Father Michael Alexa of blessed memory, and I was, again, newly Orthodox, and so I was talking to him. He was a speaker at a seminar, and so I sat with him at lunch one session, and he knew a lot. He knew a lot about Russian church history and everything. So I figured I'd show off a little of my theological chops to him. And so I said, so Father, what about this Sophiology, the Bulgakov controversy in Russia. What was that about? How did that work out? And new convert talking about Bulgakov, got him. He said, "Oh, Bulgakov, that only lasted 70, 80 years. It's blip on the screen." I went, "Wow, wait a minute. This was like a divisive, theological war in Russia, and he just dismisses it and goes, it only lasted 80 years. And so that's the Orthodox perspective. It took 400 years to get to the First Council of Nicaea. It took 200 years for the iconoclastic controversy to get resolved, and then another 200 years after that for everybody to buy into it. The church has been through all this. Your argument on the internet that's going to last the argument du jour and might even last 1,000 comments, it's going to be forgotten tomorrow. And it didn't move a blip on the screen in Orthodoxy because you weren't even a split second. The church has survived a whole lot worse than what we're going through now. And it will come through this without our help. So truth does not create despair. If we're zealous for the truth, if we think we've got to get the truth out there, well, truth doesn't cause despair. Saint Isaac the Syrian says, someone who has actually tasted truth is not contentious for truth. Interesting. Someone who is considered by people to be zealous for truth have not yet learned truth. Because once you have truly learned the truth, you will cease to be zealous on its behalf. And the truth of the matter is, the gates of hell will not prevail against the church. And we are not the gatekeepers. Jesus Christ is. And so, I'm not the fourth person of the Trinity. I might be the fifth or sixth at times, but I'm not that. So faint-heartedness is really about weakness. Faint-heartedness is kind of like are there anybody here who's too young to know who Barney Fife is? Barney Fife, Andy of Mayberry. So he's Andy's deputy, and he's this wimpy guy. He's awkward. He's embarrassing. He's socially inept, and he has one bullet in his gun, and he wields that one bullet as if it was this, like Thor's hammer. It's his claim to power. So he had this Barney Fife syndrome. It's the little man with the big presence. At least he thinks it is. And he struts around with it. Well, that's faint-heartedness. That's the fear of losing, the fear of being embarrassed, the fear of being humiliated, the fear of looking ignorant, of being exposed. And so it's all covered up with this fake facade of authority, of knowledge, of spirituality, and all that. That's faint-heartedness. And so there's a story in the Desert Fathers. A brother visited Abba Victor, the solitary, and he said to him, "What shall I do, Father, for I am in the grips of the spiritual disease of faint-heartedness?" The elder replied, "This is a disease of the soul. Just as those who suffer from ophthalmia have the impression that they see more light than those who are really healthy see." So basically it's a condition, it's like having your eyes dilated. You have the same light here, but your perception of it is blinding. Okay, so those with faint-heartedness quickly take offense at some small neglect or small insult because they think of that thing is of great importance. So a sign of faint-heartedness is when we see something, we attach a whole lot more meaning and a whole lot more importance and a whole lot more weight to it than it really has. You know, how many people, if you've had any relationships at all, you know that person that you have to walk on eggshells around.
Oh yeah.
You know, you have to really watch what you say, because whatever you say, they're going to take it in the worst possible way. They're going to take it personally. Even if you say, don't take this personally, they're going to do it. And you say that because you know they're going to do it, but they do it anyway.
Yeah.
And so that person is faint-hearted. So St. John of the Ladder says, you know, if we want to have a pure mind, but your mind is agitated by cares, you ruminate about offenses, you stay awake at night thinking about comebacks.
I'll do that one.
Anybody done that?
Oh yeah.
No, never.
So, yeah, that's right. How to respond to a perceived insult. You know, I'm going to run over that conversation in my head 100 different ways, and it's never going to come up again. But you know, but anyway, that's where our mind goes. He says, a man who thinks his mind is pure when his mind goes there is like a man who has tied his legs together and expects to be able to walk briskly. That's a good image there. So the focus, if our focus in everything, it can be in our mind, but it's especially true on the internet, social media. Our focus is on pointing out, diagnosing, complaining about problems, and not having an active engagement in real life with real human beings in accordance with the virtues that we're going to talk about that we want God to give us in real life. You are manifesting despair. All you're doing is enumerating stuff, and you're not contributing at all to solving those things because you think it's not worth it. You're powerless. You have no agency. You have no recourse. God is not with me. And it's sloth because we don't think that we can have those virtues, we can work for those virtues in our life that would allow us to do that. So you know, again, all these things are tied together. So here's your test. If you want to see if you're faint-hearted or despairing, look at your stuff on the internet and say, if small things bug me, and I can't let something go, and you have to have the last word, and you pretty much complain and point out things that are wrong with other people, with situations, with the world, with politics, you know, whatever it is, then you're spiritually despairing. And there's a cure for that. But we have to be able to look at ourselves and know that we're there. So, a little aside here, you know, the fathers talk a lot about being able to take insults, be able to take disparaging remarks, be able to take slander, things like that. Part of spiritual health, at least a sign of spiritual health, is that somebody on the internet can call me a Eastern Rite Episcopalian ecumenist heretic, and I go scroll by, not even going to grace it with a response, but that's one thing. It's another thing to be experiencing true abuse. Okay? We can endure insults, we can endure slander, we can endure all these remarks on the internet, but this is not about true abuse. living with a husband or wife who browbeats you, insults you, demeans you in public, stuff like that. That's not what we're talking about here. If that's happening, you need a Codependence Anonymous meeting, you need a therapist, you need a spiritual guidance, and you need help. This is not a sign of spirituality to endure true abuse. So I'm not giving marital advice here.
Yeah, but it's good.
I'm giving you, spiritual advice on the internet. Nobody is going to die from being insulted on the internet. If you're being insulted at home, you might. So anyway, let's keep those things separate. And if you're not sure if you're in one or the other, talk to Father, he'll let you know. Okay. Take from me lust of power. Oh man, I like this one. So, oh man. So lust of power, I mean, that's so self-explanatory. It's the love of authority, the love of respect, the love of admiration, the love of being the dominant personality in the room, having superiority over everybody else. You have the prestige, all that stuff. So, and I say this because this was pretty much my first experience with lust of power. So I wasn't even Orthodox yet. Went to Santa Barbara for a missions conference like 25, 26, 27 years ago. And Father Peter Gilquist was talking about Father Michael Alexa. And so we walk into the hotel lobby, and there's this guy sitting in a chair in the lobby in a black cassock. And I looked at that and I went, oh, baby, baby, baby.
That's cool.
I want one of those. And so cassock envy. And then, to boot, I'm talking to people. We're meeting a lot of people, a lot of Orthodox people there. And so I'm talking with this couple, and sharing stories of our conversion and what we're doing and blah blah blah. And this lady looks at me and she goes, "You should be a priest." I went, "Oh yeah, somebody else got to." Well, that wasn't wisdom speaking. That was Satan speaking through her, because he knew.
Get your ego.
Got me right there. Got me. And so, what is it with this stuff? What is it with this? Well, it's sloth. It's despair. Because this, if I'm given it, means I don't have to have any qualifications. I don't have to do any work. I don't have to have any real relationships. I don't have to earn anybody's respect. I don't have to even behave myself, really, because everybody basically bows down to this. I have instant street cred. I have instant authority. I have instant respect. I have instant admiration. I am instantly in charge. And only people like me will challenge that and say something about it. So there's a guy in 3 John, his name is Diogenes, and John says, avoid Diogenes because he loves the preeminence. He loves to be noticed. He loves being in charge. And there's a lot of that in our hearts. And so, those are, Diogenes would be on YouTube with a channel. Yeah, he's an influencer. You know, and you know, he's going to have, you know, 150,000 followers or whatever. But this is the first temptation. You know, Satan comes to Eve and says, eat this. Very simple thing, great in and of itself. Eat this and you will be like God. Not only will you be like God, have all the power, the authority, and all of that, you will know good from evil. So not only will I be like God, but and able to squash things, I'll know who to squash. I know who's good and who's not, who's worthy of being left alive and who's not. You know, so this is, you know, this is lust of power. This, you know, eat this apple, wear this cassock, act like this in church, use this pious language, drop this name. Oh, my spiritual father is Elder Ephraim. Oh, well, if that's true, how come that tree has such rotten fruit?
Oh,
You know, oh, so you know, that's all about lust of power. It's all about one up, being just a little bit better than everybody else in the room, or a little bit better than that person I'm talking to. St. Paisius of the Holy Mountain says, whoever rejoices when they're admired by people is being mocked by the demons. So power is the shortcut because of sloth and despair and faint-heartedness. So we're not willing or able to do the hard work of becoming truly holy, taking spiritual direction, being under authority. We're still damp out of the baptistry, and we're trying to run the church because we don't trust the church. We don't trust the canonical processes that the church has had in place for 2,000 years to deal with this stuff. And it's our way of trying to show dominion, to grasp power out of the hands of God, who is really over all things and working all things out. So, again, you know, we keep going back to all these things being tied together. St. Anthony says, give up your desire to control people. Well, okay, easy enough. Withdraw from disputes. Withdraw from trying to win arguments. Withdraw from trying to change people's minds, to have the last word, and be humble enough to look weak, ignorant, and stupid. So if you are, Psalm 131 verse 1 is one of my favorite Psalms, and it's the hardest one to live up to. It says, Lord, my heart is not proud, my eyes are not haughty, and I do not get involved in things that are too great and too difficult for me. Yeah, okay, leave that right there. So, slander and gossip. I'm going to make this one short because I really want to get into the next one. Slander and gossip are basically power plays too. So, you have this person out there who is trumping it over you. And I'm not talking about that Trump. They're just, you know, they've got it on you. Well, what's the shortcut to getting them out of your life? It's slander and gossip. So you can discredit, you can neutralize, you can eliminate the threats to their ego by slander. And it shows everybody else that you're on the inside track of what's really going on here. You know, I've got the big picture. I've got the straight dope here. And so it's a way for us to keep control, to manage, you know, damage control if you have to, but it's a way to keep your power, to have the control of the situation and, you know, other people's perceptions and all that. So The fathers are hell on slander and gossip. St. Augustine says, if you hear anything, let it die in you. Rest assured, you will not burst. So that's just one. I got a bunch of other ones here. So idle talk. This is the last one. Yes, idle talk. This is the hardest one. So I'm sitting in an intersection, and there's sitting next to me is a couple guys on Harleys. And what do people on Harleys do at an intersection? You're at a red light. Okay, what are they doing? They're idling. The guy in the big diesel truck, boom. What is he doing? He's idling. But he's sure making a big show of going nowhere. So, idle talk is basically talk that goes nowhere. We're argumentative, we're acerbic, we're mocking, condescending, we're insulting, and it doesn't move the needle on anything or anyone except your passions. Idle talk. So, the St. John in the Ladder, when you leave your cell, be sparing with your tongue, because it can scatter in a moment the fruit of many labors. And so when you sit down at your keyboard, kind of look at your life as your cell. And when you sit down at your keyboard, what are you doing? You're leaving your real life, your one-on-one, your real flesh and blood relationships, and you're going out of your cell into the world. I mean, the world, because it's all accessible to you on the internet. And so when you sit down at your keyboard, you're leaving your cell of your real life and actual flesh and blood people, and you're going out into an entire faceless digital world. And one comment can undo an entire lifetime of relationships. And so watch your keyboard. Watch your tongue when you go out into the world. Abbot Joseph once remarked, I love this one, the most useless persons he ever encountered were those who just had their first religious experiences, where they were insufferably arrogant and cocksure of their spirituality. So look back on mine, and it's like, where was Abbot Joseph when I needed him? Yeah. So the other thing, idle talk is also translated sometimes meddling, but idle talk and meddling, they go together. It's basically Jerry Springer spirituality. Jerry Springer spirituality is voyeurism, is delighting in and having a morbid interest in watching or knowing other people's dark sides, their failures, their downfalls, their sins, their shortcomings. We make entertainment out of exposing other people's sins. It's an unhealthy focus on evil, and basically all it boils back to is sloth and faint-heartedness, because I don't have to move the needle on my life, and I can watch hoarders and go, well, at least I'm not that bad. I'm better than that, and I didn't have to do a thing. I'm already better. So reality TV gives us a sense of superiority. It's proud triumphalism without any work. So meddling. 1 Peter 4:15. Peter's talking about suffering as a Christian. He says, you're going to experience persecution, but he said, if you're going to suffer as a Christian, do not suffer as a murderer, a thief, or a meddler. Wow. Murder, thievery, and meddling? All in the same sentence? And this is the only place in the whole scripture that this word is used. It is allotripe episkopos. And it is what it sounds like, allo, meaning everything. And what is episkopos? It's a bishop, our overseer. And so, an allotripe episkopos is used to describe someone who takes it upon themselves to oversee and involve themselves in matters that do not concern them in a disruptive or unwelcome manner. It carries a negative connotation, suggesting that the interference in the affairs of others without invitation and without authority. If you've ever sent an unasked for private message, email to someone to give them your opinion, to correct, to teach, admonish, or warn them about something or somebody else, or even themselves on the internet, you are as bad as a murderer and a thief. That is a deep, dark, overpowering spiritual illness. To make yourself the episkopos of the world. Watch your keyboard. So we have an irresistible urge. This is Lorenzo Scopoli, The Unseen Warfare. We have an irresistible urge to speak out in a stream of words with many repetitions to impress our opinions in the hearts of others, thus foisting ourselves upon them as unbidden teachers, and sometimes we even dream of making everybody else our pupils. Elder Porphyrios. Oh, well, but these people need to be taught. These people need to hear the truth. Elder Porphyrios, modern elder, just passed away in 1990s, I think. He said, I do not speak to Christ with anyone unless they ask me to speak to them. The elder would say this not because of his ego, but because he said he has respect for the freedom of each individual. I pray for these people. I will even work a miracle for them, but I will not speak to them. I want their soul to be open and to ask me. And if they ask, they will listen. If they're not asking, they're not going to talk. They're not going to listen. So a couple more quotes here, and then we'll wrap this up. Thank you. I'll skip that one. St. John again. Talkativeness comes mostly from vainglory, pride, which makes us think that we know a great deal, and we imagine that our opinion on a subject or conversation is the best of all. All right, so I'll just skip all these. They're basically repeating the same thing. Arguing and quarreling are signs of self-love and pride. Humility is being the first one to stop an argument. That's pretty hard to do. As birds fear the sight of a hawk, so those who practice humility fear the sound of an argument. Why is that? Because an argument fishes into our heart and draws out the passions. Be afraid of being tempted to sin. So, Elder Macarios of Optina, refrain from heated discussions of religious matters, for there is no good in them. So, to sum it up, I'm going to do the ladder of comment boxes set. This will only take a second. So, the ladder, step 8, says, the first step toward freedom from anger is to keep the lips silent when your heart is stirred. The next, to keep your thoughts silent when your soul is upset. Lips, thoughts. And the last, to be totally calm, your heart, when unclean winds are blowing. So how does this translate to the internet? Well, here's the ladder of comment boxes set. So the first step is you write the comment and then you apologize for it. Second step is you write the comment, but you don't click send. You sit on it for a day. You stay awake all night thinking about it, and then you go back and delete it. Okay? The third step is you write half of the comment, the rest is in your head, you delete it. The fourth step is you hover over your keyboard, you think about it, you think better of it, you go, nah, reach for the mouse and you scroll past. Fifth step is you read the post, you shake your head, and you scroll on by. You're getting there, getting there. The sixth step is you read the first 7 words, 5 words of the post, you know where it's going, and you scroll on past and you don't even wonder what the rest of it was. That's when your heart is still. And so we have to be self-aware. We have to be able to look at ourselves, look at our hearts, and when we see something, we're engaged with something, when we're engaged with ourselves, when we're standing behind the old lady in the aisle at Fry's at the tofu, and we feel this agitation, this disturbance, this thing going on, this conflict, this something, you might not even be able to name it, but you know something's happening. Pay attention. Pay attention to that, because that's your warfare, that's your arena, and that's where your fight begins. And in the next session, we'll talk about the locus me, the thoughts, and how to fight all of that stuff. So thank you for your attention so far, and Father Tom will tell us what we're doing next. Thank you.
Stone, you want to go ahead and we'll stop this and then we'll start a second one. When we